Are there any other protocols I need to know about? This is my first Skype video interview that's being recorded.
No protocols.
Okay,
Uh, this is sort of guerrilla journalism.
nice.
Low budget.
Yeah, perfect. That's the best.
Well, I want to welcome Lisa Fernandez from Portland, Maine, and many other websites and collectives. We'll get to that. This is an installment of Conversations with Willi, and we're looking forward to going all the way across country to see what's going on. So Lisa, why don't you go ahead and take some time to introduce you and your work and your organizations for us.
Sure, sure. So I'm living in Portland, Maine. Actually, I'm about 3 miles from downtown Portland, Maine. And for those of you who haven't been here, it's a really amazing place to be. And having had the good fortune to do a lot of traveling in my past, I really deliberately chose to be here. And so very close to the ocean. Maine is not a very populated place. It's a little different from where you are, Willie. So, you know, Portland's the biggest city in Maine, and it's only 70,000 people. And
Really?
yeah, yeah, and it has real 19th century bones, so it's really lovely in the way that it developed sort of pre-heavy industrialization. So it still has some nice resilience infrastructure built into it. So what I'm involved in at the moment is a number of things, and one of those is a group called Portland Maine Permaculture, which I founded in 2005. I had been at this conference in Kinsale, Ireland that summer called Fueling the Future, which had a subtitle of The Challenge and the Opportunity of Peak Oil, which is really important for me to have come at it with that subtitle because I do feel like there are both challenges and opportunities.
Right.
And I sort of came back home inspired to create alternatives to maybe the fear-based or scarcity-based responses that a lot of people were voicing. So Portland, Maine Permaculture came about at that time. I had been dabbling in permaculture since 1991, 92, but this really brought me back to it. And now the group, 5.5 years later, is about 1,000 members, and we run about 30 events a month, skill shares, movies, workshops, anything that has to do with resilience building. And I think resilience happens at a lot of levels. So it gives us a lot of flexibility to do great stuff. And it makes it all very accessible. So that's the primary thing I'm working on. It's kind of becoming a hub. So we gave it a home called the Resilience Hub. So if any member comes up with a program that needs a home, a project that needs a home, or wants to do fundraising and needs that infrastructure, we can help, be that place. Very thin infrastructure, but the minimum needed to make projects happen and capacitate people and landscapes. So those are a couple of the biggies right now.
Excellent. You have 6 to 7 months of cold, snowy weather.
Yes, we do. We have a short growing season here in Maine. We do. It's probably why we don't have so many people here. But, Maine was the breadbasket for the entire country before the Civil War, before the Midwest started opening up. And as people start to do local food analysis and food shed analysis in this part of the country, and thinking about how you might feed New England 10, 20, 50 years from now, they're really looking at Maine. We've got acreage, we have access to oceans and fisheries, and we have know-how. We haven't completely lost the threads of resilience, which sadly I think has happened in some places.
Resilience means self-sufficiency,
Well,
determination to
I think
find.
it's a little more a little bit deeper than that. It's the ability to really withstand changes or shocks in the system and be able to navigate through those, bounce back, and still sort of survive and thrive once you get to the other side. And I think resilience at a personal level that many of us are trying to foster, and then at a household level, and maybe our grandparents and great-grandparents sort of had that more inherently. And then there's resilience at a community level, and in a place like Maine, where we do have such a short growing season, we are quite aware of the fact that more than 90% of the food we purchase comes from far away, usually with fossil fuels involved. So that feels like a big vulnerability. We're not alone in that. A lot of people in North America are in that situation, indeed the world. But it's a place where we can foster an enormously higher level of resilience if we really think strategically.
Are you deploying greenhouse technology to extend the growing seasons?
Yeah, we pretty much have to. Season extension is one of the core tools in the Northeast Permaculture Toolkit, I would say. So when we're working with design students or people that just want to learn how to grow a bit of food in their landscape, we're almost always talking about how to both extend the regular growing season, but also really harvest right around the calendar. And we're fortunate enough to have sort of one of the, fairy godfathers of season extension right here in Maine, which is the farmer Elliot Coleman, who's written some great books about, four-season harvest and the winter harvest manual. So with the right choice of crops and a fairly modest investment in infrastructure, there's an amazing amount of food you can harvest in an unheated greenhouse, or using some season extension techniques that don't cost a lot of money. And the goal is for everyone to feel like they have the tools and the knowledge and the skills to participate in some of their own food security in whatever way works for them.
Interesting. One of the principles of a book that I just sent you 3 minutes ago, a woman has put out a book here, and she talks about abundance.
Yes.
And I think that's an interesting point to explore and to work from, because I'm really saddened by the lack of progress on the materialism and the consumption ethic in the country.
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by very expensive houses and people and cars, and a sort of blindness to what some would call the crash or a transition or both. So speak to the idea of abundance and what that means in your vision.
Yeah, I would say there are sort of practical levels at which we're working on abundance, as well as metaphysical levels or philosophical levels of abundance thinking as a foil to scarcity thinking, which has gotten us where we are in large part. On the one hand, in the very practical, tangible sense, we talk a lot about, well, how can we get people to see, or how can we encourage them to see that there's another story, or that we're working with a set of narratives that may no longer be serving us, and we're coming at it with the idea of how can we change minds. And what I'm increasingly experiencing is that if I just stop even trying to do that and create physical abundance, if I create beauty, and I personally think beauty is the opposite of poverty. If I create beauty, something that someone can walk into and be absolutely bowled over with a sense of being cared for, nurtured, and surrounded by abundance, which has very little to do with cash, that has far more impact and is far more compelling than any attempts I may have made at proselytizing in the past about what abundance is all about. So one example would be, I happen to live on a 1/3 acre, kind of typical suburban lot. And when I moved here 8 years ago, in a very different frame of mind, granted, it was sort of all lawn and conifers, and it was very ledgy and rocky. And I remember thinking, well, it's a really nice house, but too bad I'll never be able to grow any food here. And so fast forward to the summer of 2010, and our place was on a local backyard, how do you grow your own food fundraising tour, and 150 people showed up in a morning, and their jaws hit the ground at the sheer abundance of what they were seeing, in the horizontal plane, in the vertical plane. There was beauty, there was wildlife, there was food, there was medicine, fuel, all of the sort of functional elements of a permaculture landscape. And it honestly blew people away. And these might be people whose bumper stickers I wouldn't necessarily agree with. And that doesn't matter, because there's a place at the table for everybody. And, those persons might be making choices different to mine, and they'll still be needing to feed their kids when the time comes. And so my feeling is, how do I be of service and demonstrate abundance and live abundance? And that's where the metaphysical, philosophical piece comes in. Because I feel like that is the best way to be of service to the earth and to other people, is to demonstrate it and live it and make it available and accessible.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, do you have a question or two for me? What you got there?
Yeah, I do actually. I've been thinking a lot about this notion that I know you're pondering a lot, which is, the new myths or the new stories that we create. What are the narratives that can help us traverse the rocky territory that we're going through here? Because we have definitely organized ourselves in the landscape, as well as the invisible structures of the economy and everything else, according to a set of stories, and we need new ones. And I'm trying to think about how do we do that in a way that's accessible? Like, do we need to be thinking about creating stories that are as accessible as, the inception of Spider-Man, as a mythic story? What catches the eyeballs and hearts and hands of people in a way that they can connect with today? And so how do we work on the creation of those new stories in an accessible fashion?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've written 7 what I'm calling new myths. And Hollywood isn't beating down my door to publish them, but they're based in a permaculture theme. And I'm talking about sacred, I'm talking about the crash, I'm talking about real current stuff. So yeah. These particular myths that I'm calling are they're really calls, and they're elements. They're pieces of something that's growing. So I don't necessarily see them as legitimate. Even I'm trying just to get things out there, park them, and have people take them for a ride.
Yeah.
What I also would say is that I see a lot of independent character and push, independent control in permaculture, and I'm hoping that spirit of, hit the land and make it better grows out instead of being so internalized. There's that pioneer spirit I'm finding in permaculture, which is really important. But I don't see that same intensity coming back out into the community. As a community pioneering spirit. So right. there's that schism that I'm finding between the independent guys and the folks who are trying to start garden clubs and hubs and community resource.
Right.
So there's that. And I would also say that the electronic world that our children live in is a very big challenge to me as to how we disseminate soil-based, agricultural-based story. I think we have a lot of competition away from the science fiction of our time, which is a really big distraction. Do you know any children's games online that are permaculture-based? Electronic games?
No, I mean, there are some that are sort of coming out of the environmental education world, but nothing specific to permaculture that I know of. It certainly could exist, but most of the people I know doing permaculture stuff with kids are out there in the dirt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. I think it's going to have to be a hybrid of learning to find those pieces, those narratives based on the gardens, and then figuring out a way to share some of those metaphors, archetypes, and building new stories. So it's a very dynamic place, a field.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's going to be an easy one, but it's definitely important to find those myths.
Right. And I think in the spirit of finding the right leverage points in a system, for better or worse, we're seeing changes in the world, whether they're economic systems, political systems. We're seeing changes in the world that I feel like are starting to create openings in the conversation where we would not maybe have been able to have the conversation before. I think a lot of people's eyes are opening in a different way and starting to question some of the dominant narratives. Stories such as there's such a thing as infinite economic growth and that equals good and there are no alternatives. I mean, that's a story. It's a social construct. And I think a lot of folks, regular mainstream people, are really examining that story right now with a little more skepticism that's probably healthy.
Let's talk a little bit about the crash or the transition. I guess I'm trying to bring myself back to a middle ground between calling it just, the end of the world and we're all going to croak versus having some sort of positive transition ahead.
Yeah.
What is the thinking out there about that?
I can only speak to, the conversations I'm in here in Maine, and that might not be indicative of the broader world. We're sort of out here on the corner poking out into the Atlantic Ocean, practically in Canada. But really, the conversations here have to do with the fact that, yes, there are some hardships ahead, and indeed there are hardships right now. People are facing challenges here and elsewhere on the planet. Most people are expecting those challenges. Most of the people I'm around anyway, that might not be a cross-section of humanity, but most people are expecting the challenges to intensify in some way. So are some people talking about the end of the world as we know it? Yes, they are. Maine has its fair share of buy 40 acres and stockpile ammunition type of folks. That's one possibility, and most folks here that I'm working with are trying to build that other sidewalk, right? And what I mean by that is a lot of people are so busy and so challenged and, really working very hard to just pay their bills and feed their kids and stay in their houses, and I have an enormous amount of compassion for that. They do not even have the opportunity to look up and look around and see what might be coming. So it behooves a bunch of us, whoever of us are able, to be actively building that other sidewalk so that when those folks see that their sidewalk's crumbling out from under them, they can look up and say, oh, all right, great, there's some options here, rather than run for the hills, zombie apocalypse is upon us kind of response. Because, there are people that feel that's the only possible way this is going to play out. And yes, it'll be bad in some places. Some places probably have a better chance of this resulting in some positive outcomes. There's no blanket set of outcomes. I think it will really vary by place and by time. And my outlook is work as hard as I can to increase the risk, to increase the likelihood of good outcomes in the place where I happen to be.
Interesting. What is sacred to you today?
The dirt, the soil.
The dirt.
I mean, I've seen people get religion at the compost pile, no question about it. There's, and I feel like maybe this will resonate with you, but we're such a transient people, Americans, or we have been for a little while.
Mhm.
And now I've lived in this house for 8 years, and I'm probably typical. This is the longest I've lived in any house for my whole life. And I've been working this soil and knowing this soil and building a mycelial mat, like a vibrant network of life below ground that's far more diverse and far more complex and rich than anything I can see above ground. And the future of humanity, the future of my people, depends on the top 6 inches of that stuff. Like no civilization has ever survived the loss of its humus. Like, period. So that's the altar that I worship at, because everything comes from it and everything goes back to it, and it's the source of all beauty, all life. And if we set ourselves one task, which is the care and feeding and nurturing and honoring of the life of that soil, I think that would increase our odds of good outcomes 1,000-fold. So that's what I consider sacred at the moment, is the place where I happen to stand. And Bill Mollison's kind of famous for saying a lot of things, but start at your nose and work out from there. And so I'm trying to really live what it is I claim to espouse in the world.
Right.
Yeah.
That's integrity.
Trying. It's hard.
Well, that leads me to one of my basic research questions. I did some research on Mollison's ideas about spiritual or the sacred.
Yeah.
And there really isn't a lot of attention to that.
No, there isn't.
I'm going to follow up on that. I
Yeah.
have talked to Maddie Hartland at Permaculture Magazine
Yeah.
to send her another piece, and she talks about how permaculturists in the UK don't want to deal with matters of the heart or spiritual. They don't want the government looking at them like they're crazy. They want to take permaculture back into a very strict land use practice. You know, square footage, footprint, sun angle. Here's the application.
Right.
So I was really interested in that. And then also the folks down in Australia have another way to push back on incorporating sacred, and they're talking about the agricultural sector being very conservative, and they don't want to disrupt that tradition of Protestant farming, or whatever you want to call that down there. So I just wanted to get a little bit of feedback on why you think we need to incorporate a sacred quality, or maybe we don't want to incorporate a sacredness in our practice of permaculture.
I think there are as many flavors of permaculture as there are of people. I don't happen to be one of those people that subscribes to the view that if Bill Mollison didn't say it, then it's not permaculture. I personally believe that there's an enormous value in, the inner landscape work as well as the outer landscape work. Not everyone wants to go there, and that's completely fine with me. But those who want to should have a place, in the permaculture world, in the permaculture discussion. My primary teachers, Charles and Julia Yelton, very much encourage that inner work. It's that notion of, you're on an airplane and there's a loss of cabin pressure, and what do they always say? You put on your own oxygen mask before helping others, kind of an idea. So my feeling is, if I'm not right with myself, if I'm not sort of doing some of the inner landscape work, and I have, long-term dysfunction or issues that I might need to deal with, I'm not going to be as good as I can be for the earth and for the other people that I'm trying to serve in a permaculture system of earth care and people care. Now, if someone doesn't want to go down that path, can they still hang out with us and do permaculture in Portland, Maine? Absolutely. I think that we happen to live in New England here, where there's a very strong sort of Protestant work ethic and a very sort of feeling of privacy around people's spiritual and sacred practices. But at the same time, this was the place of Emerson and Thoreau and transcendentalists, and biodynamics is really taking on a new role in mainstream organic agriculture. And one of the beauties of what's happening is that even though permaculture has tended to marginalize itself really well over the last 30 years, we're getting that feeling now, thanks to whatever it is, I don't know, the new wave of permaculturists in the world. There's a feeling of, we're not going to hold all our toys in our sandbox, and you have to come and play in our sandbox and subscribe to our worldview in order to get our toys. We're going beyond that. We're saying, these toys are for everybody. Use the ones that you are able to use, whether you're a mainstream conservative farmer that wants to learn about keyline plowing, or you're someone that wants to do, some real sacred inner landscape cosmology in a permaculture milieu. I think all of those toys, if you will, or tools, are now getting out there in the world, whether you're calling them permaculture or not. I think the time is too urgent. The needs are too great for any holding action or any holding sort of philosophy around this stuff and saying, this is the definition of permaculture and this isn't, and, this is the holy sacred club, of permaculture. We really have to let all flavors just go at it as quickly as possible in an accessible, supportive way. And that'll play out differently in different places. So
True.
Personally, yes, I see the sacred being intrinsic, and people will come to it as they come to it and can't be forced to come to it.
Are you a pagan?
I don't know. I have my own sort of spiritual reality, but I was brought up Catholic, and I'm not really participating in that anymore, but I will say that it taught me the value of ritual and of marking time and of being in community with others and having the sacred as a part of my life, and I do carry those pieces with me. Insofar as I worship the soil, I suppose you could say, sort of a nature-based pagan pantheist, perhaps.
I'll use that.
Yeah, there's that. But at the same time, I am extremely humbled by many different faith groups that are coming to the work of permaculture, and I honor their faith traditions. And there's a role for all of us in finding the common ground of earth care, people care, I think, in the world that's non-denominational.
I am constantly amazed at the fragmentation of what I'll call the green movement, for lack of a better phrase. I see a lot of rising stars, big name, expensive consultants, Hollywood people. I see the same old capitalist trip, just with a new pseudo value set.
Yeah.
I'm also extremely concerned that what we'll call the permaculture movement doesn't have a larger political base or structure. So having said that, are you someone who would run for governor of Maine? Are you someone who would go back to mainstream politics to help the cause? If somebody said,
that's a good question. That's a good question. I would say there have been times in my life where I've been more politically active and times where I've been less politically active. The rule in my house at the moment is if either of us thinks about running for office, the marriage is over. We have plenty of work to do, honestly, that happens to be non-governmental. At the same time, I applaud and support the work of people who are trying to make change, through those avenues. I'm discouraged at the level of what seems like dysfunction around the issues that we care about in permaculture at the national and international level, and also, quite frankly, at a lot of the state levels.
Mhm.
And local level is probably where I'm feeling the most affinity right now, local government and local self-control and local food sovereignty ordinances and this type of work.
Mhm.
Um, I do feel like even though I personally wouldn't go into that arena, that we should be thinking more about affinity groups, right? So for those of us who are working on creating those, as Joanna Macy would say, those Gaian structures, right? We're creating whatever needs to come next when whatever we have now falls apart. Um, that's where I am. But I have an enormous amount of affinity with people who are trying to make change within the system. And if there's anything we can do to support them and connect with them and link up arms with them, I would be there. But I would unequivocally say I will never run for the governorship of the state of Maine. And that should be no surprise to anyone that knows me. So,
Well, it might be a city council job, though. What do you think about city council level?
that's the highest level that I think I would be interested in, and I'm not actually interested in that right now. I feel like my work is in the soil, connecting elements of the human and non-human community, to find very practical ways forward through the challenges we face. Because, even in transition, they talk about this triple challenge at the moment of climate change, peak oil, and, economic collapse. I would add political inertia.
Hmm.
There's really four pieces to the perfect storm that we're in right now, largely, I think, because of the corporate takeover of politics and those ego pieces you identified, whether they're
Hmm.
in the green movement or not, which reminds me that I don't even like to use the word green, sustainable, eco. I feel like they've been completely co-opted and greenwashed at this point. So I'm trying to find the new language as well as the new story. And I don't know if you have thoughts about those words, but sustainable is a really tough one for me right now because even Monsanto says they're practicing sustainable agriculture
Yeah.
on the public video ads. So what does
Yeah.
that mean anymore?
Well, true enough. Why don't we finish today? Tell me a little bit about how you're connected nationally
Mm.
and internationally. What are those two arenas like, and how do you connect up, and who do you know, and how would we benefit from your network there?
Um, I'd say right now, a lot of my organizing is either super local, right? So if we have a mycelial mat of permaculture thinkers covering the planet, I happen to be, with it working within one node here in the state of Maine. But I also am involved in the Permaculture Institute of the Northeast, which is really trying to be of service to the whole network of nodes in that
Hmm.
mycelial sort of pattern across the Northeast and build capacity and strengthen what we all are doing in the region. Um, and we have convergences and retreats and, we're doing a lot of skill sharing and peer-to-peer professional development. Otherwise, I would say I'm connected nationally through, things like social media, Facebook, Twitter. I've made some really brilliant and fruitful connections, and I learned so much from my colleagues all around North America and around the world through those venues. And that's probably how I met you.
Good. Well, how many times a day do you tweet?
Well, I only quote unquote work 3.5 days a week. Otherwise, I'm with my family and working here in the gardens and so forth.
Okay.
So I would say while I am working, I might hit Twitter 2 or 3 times a day on those 3.5 days. So not too much. I'm not sort of hardcore, but I do like to follow certain hashtags. Permaculture being one of them. Um, and I really find it's opening my eyes to some great things that are happening all around the world and inspiring a lot of us locally to learn new things. So it's accelerated the natural succession of learning in a way, if you
Very
in
cool.
ecosystem terms. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Lisa.m.fernandes, to be exact. You have a signature line longer than I. That's great. I'm gonna post this not
Okay.
only on Planet Shifter as a web post with the notes, but then I'll shoot this video to YouTube, and then you can share it with others.
Okay. Thanks, Willie.
All right, I'll check you later.
Okay, take good care.
Bye,
Peace.
man.
Bye.